The city of Albuquerque, New Mexico contains a most unique national park site, Petroglyph National Monument.
We date petroglyphs.
My name is David Ottaviano. I am an interpretive park ranger here at Petroglyph National Monument. We're here to learn about Petroglyph National Monument. Note the name of the park, Petroglyph National Monument. Petro means rock and glyph means carving. So when most people think of Petroglyph National Monument, they think of petroglyphs. That makes sense. Petroglyph is in our name, and there is a huge concentration of petroglyphs found in the monument. That was the main reason the monument was set aside to preserve and protect the large concentration of petroglyphs. Here we have a petroglyph, probably the image of a mountain lion. This petroglyph is rather well known and photographed often. Most of the petroglyphs in the monument were carved by the ancestral Pueblo, Native Americans active in this area over a long period of time.
The Pueblo people of today are related to the ancestral Pueblo who carved the majority of our petroglyphs here at Petroglyph National Monument.
Contemporary Pueblo people look at the petroglyphs at Petroglyph National Monument and elsewhere in the area as being made by their ancestors, by their descendants. Some Pueblo people today look at these petroglyphs, many of which are probably over 500 years old, as a kind of claim to the land, documentation, if you will, that their people lived and depended on the landscape that is now Petroglyph National Monument for a long time. And for these reasons, contemporary Pueblo people regard this area as sacred. Of course, one doesn't have to be a descendant of the ancestral Pueblo to appreciate the importance of the petroglyphs and the importance of the cultural history that took place here. The petroglyphs are carved into lava rocks, or more specifically, the rocks are called basalt. The landscape at Petroglyph National Monument has been entirely shaped by volcanism, by volcanoes. The ancestral Pueblo regarded the volcanoes and the associated vents where lava deep in the earth came up to the surface as sacred, and was part of their belief system and origin story. For that reason, they decided to leave many petroglyphs on the volcanic landscape, recognizing the spiritual and cultural importance of the area. On the western side of Albuquerque, on the west side of the park, is what is called the Albuquerque volcanoes. There are 5 volcanoes. These, the 3 largest and the most obvious volcanoes, are locally referred to as the Three Sisters. There are 2 smaller volcanoes just to the north. There are different types of volcanoes, but the volcanoes here are called fissure volcanoes. Fissure volcanoes are usually small volcanoes like ours and are called monogenic volcanoes, meaning they are only active once or for a short period of time, and then they are done. Here is an example of fissure volcanoes from Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. Scientists believe the Albuquerque volcanoes were active approximately 200,000 years ago. In geologic time, this is pretty recent. Because of the high, dry desert of the Southwest, they are well preserved. There are lots of interesting geologic features that are fascinating to observe. Features like these remind us that the rock was once hot, flowing liquid lava. These formations are called pahoehoe ropes. They form when the top surface of the flowing lava starts to cool and move slowly, but the main body of lava is still very hot and flowing, as the lava flows in this video from Hawaii. You get these folds or ropes that develop. Pahoehoe ropes are lava features we see only on the most fluid types of lava flows. Back to the volcanoes on Albuquerque's West Mesa. 200,000 years ago, lava under pressure flowed out of the cracks and created the mesa top with a cap rock. Below the plants and layer of soil and sand is the cap rock, lava rock. Here is a good image showing that cap rock. Where the lava flow ends is where the volcanic hillside or escarpment starts. The lava cap rock flowed onto alluvial or sandy, rocky soil that is susceptible to erosion. When it rains, the sandy, rocky soil washes down the hillside. Over time, the cap rock becomes unstable. Portions of the cap rock will break off and roll down the escarpment. Over time, these boulders will kind of armor and stabilize the hillside. On these boulders, the ancestral Pueblo and later the Spanish left their petroglyphs. However, the volcanic hillside or escarpment is still very sensitive to erosion today, and for that reason we ask visitors to stay on the established trails and not walk on the escarpment. This lava rock or basalt stone we see where gas collected where the lava was hot and flowing. The gas is under pressure and is in fact what is pushing or propelling the lava deep out of the ground and then across the landscape. These holes are called vesicles, which are small cavities in the volcanic rock that were formed by the expansion of a bubble gas that was trapped inside the lava. Once the lava cooled, the gas escaped, but the vesicles or cavities remained. Here's another photo taken down below the escarpment. You can see the cap rock on top of the escarpment and the boulders strewn along the escarpment, where people left their petroglyphs. The cholla cactus in the photo is a common plant found throughout the monument. A lot of wildlife in the monument is found on this escarpment band. The boulders create crevices and areas that are perfect for small prey like rabbits, squirrels, and lizards to hide and make their homes. In turn, predators like snakes, hawks, and coyotes constantly patrol the escarpment. There is more wildlife concentrated along the escarpment than there is on the mesa top or the flat grasslands below the escarpment for this reason. On this boulder are signs of droppings from hawks or owls as they sit here to scope the area for prey. From here, they can see and hear any movement. Petroglyphs are rock carvings. They are an important form of cultural and spiritual expression, and they were probably used for storytelling, describing origin stories, or recording significant life or clan events. There are a lot of different types of petroglyphs: footprints, handprints, images of birds or other animals. Some depict face masks that were used for spiritual ceremonies or shaman figures, and some depict abstract geometric designs. Petroglyphs were not a language like we understand language today. The petroglyphs conveyed ideas, and many of those ideas were spiritual or religious in nature. No one can say for sure what many petroglyphs portray. Native peoples today may hold complex and widely varying interpretations of many images. There is something very compelling about images of hands. Maybe it is because we easily identify with them. They seem timeless and obviously very human, regardless of what culture made them. Hands were the most useful tools for early cultures. The ancestral Pueblo were master craftspeople, utilizing resources, most of which were locally found, making their bows and arrows, sandals, ropes, pottery, and clothing. They were also farmers who cultivated, harvested, and ground corn. The use and skill of their hands were vital to their survival. Perhaps the hand petroglyphs recognized and celebrated their usefulness and their ability to not only survive, but to flourish in a rather harsh desert environment.
So how are petroglyphs made possible? How are we able to see these images? Petroglyphs are rock carvings, so there's no paint involved.
Looking at these images, you notice that they are gray, but the surrounding rock is dark brown or black. That thin layer of darkness on the outside of the rock is called desert varnish. Desert varnish is like a rust quality, which forms on the outside of the rock over hundreds of years. Desert varnish is a geologic, chemical process that is found in desert environments and happens to the outside of fixed rocks that are exposed to the elements. Native people determined, probably several thousand years ago, that if they removed that thin outside layer of desert varnish, they get to the lighter, more natural gray color of the rock underneath, and that creates the contrast. That is how we're able to see these images. Over time, petroglyphs will fade as they get older. The desert varnish weathering process will continue, but it will take a long time for petroglyphs to darken and become hard to see. How were the native people carving the petroglyphs? Like just about all their tools, they were making them, usually using locally sourced material. What kind of tools were they using to carve the petroglyphs? Basalt is a relatively hard stone, not easy to carve into, so they needed a rock that was very hard and strong and could be used to carve and chip away at the lava rock. This is an artifact found in the monument, and it's a rather common artifact. We would call it a scraper. If you look, the edge has been chipped off. This is chert, a type of rock that when you chip it like this, the edge is particularly sharp. They would use a tool like this to remove flesh from an animal they were butchering, or they could make an axe head out of it. They were probably using a tool similar to this to carve petroglyphs. Many of the petroglyphs are quite elaborate, and we believe they would be using a tool like this. We would call this a stone chisel. This is another artifact that is also common in the monument. We would call this a hammerstone. If you notice, the hammerstone part of the rock is a little chipped from use. So in conjunction with a stone chisel, they would use a hard circular round rock or hammerstone like this to strike the stone chisel. They would be using both rocks together, the hammerstone to hit the stone chisel to make the carvings. Not only was there a lot of thought given to the images, but there was a lot of skill and time involved to carve the petroglyphs.
Artifacts are important objects that tell the story of the park, so they mustn't be lost. What should you do if you find an artifact in the park? Leave it where you found it.
This is a very well-known petroglyph of a bird, but in this particular case, we are pretty confident that this is an image of a macaw parrot, indicated by the long plumed tail. The image next to the macaw might be a smaller macaw in a cage, which may tell the story of how the birds were brought up from the rainforests of southern Mexico and Central America. Macaws were a trade item, traded for their beautiful feathers. Archaeologists have discovered depictions of macaws in Kiva murals from the Rio Grande area to Chaco Canyon and elsewhere in the region. The macaw feathers were used for decoration on clothing and special ceremonial purposes such as dances. The birds were seen as very special and exotic. Some contemporary Pueblo groups today continue to use colorful macaw feathers for ceremonial and traditional events. This is an example of where we can make an educated guess. Here is another bird, petroglyph, probably a depiction of a hawk. This is a red-tailed hawk, very common in the monument. It is probably what the previous petroglyph was depicting. There are a lot of realistic animal petroglyphs. That previous petroglyph might have been depicting a coyote similar to this photograph of a coyote among the basalt boulders. Coyotes are very numerous and found throughout the monument. This petroglyph is a depiction of a deer or elk with a spear through it. There are many petroglyphs found in the monument which seem to be depicting a hunting scene. This makes sense since we know that in addition to spiritual reasons, the ancestral Pueblo were coming to the area that is now the monument, in part for hunting purposes. This petroglyph may have been memorializing an important hunt or may have been made to encourage success on future hunts. One thing interesting is the circle in the upper left corner, which might be depicting a full moon, a time when they may have chosen to hunt, allowing for the cover of night but not total darkness. Here is a petroglyph of a spiral circle or a circle of life image. This type of petroglyph is common throughout the monument and the Southwest more generally. There are many different interpretations of their meaning. Spiral petroglyphs are often associated with wind, water, and an individual's journey through life. When the desert millipede is handled or bothered, they curl up into a spiral like this. The spiral petroglyph kind of looks like a desert millipede, which is common in the area and found in the monument. Desert millipedes come out when there has been rain. Many people believe the spiral petroglyph is associated with water, so there could be this connection between the spiral image, the desert millipede, and rain. There are many petroglyphs similar to this one. We believe those petroglyphs are likely depictions of a yucca pod. There are many different types of yucca found throughout the Southwest. The plant was very useful to the ancestral Pueblo. The importance of the yucca plant cannot be overstated. The yucca was an important food source for the Pueblo people, and all parts were used. The roots were roasted and mashed and eaten like potatoes. The flowers, fruits, and seeds were also eaten. Leaf fibers were used as thread and twisted into cordage. Yucca fibers were woven into baskets, mats, sandals, and hunting nets. Yucca leaves were ideal for basket weaving and paintbrushes, and the points of the leaves can be used as needles. Crushed dried roots of the yucca mixed with water were used for making soap and shampoo, hence a type of yucca commonly called soap tree yucca. The yucca is sometimes called the wonder plant, and for this reason. It isn't surprising that they would create petroglyphs representing and celebrating this important plant. The yucca blossom is the state flower of New Mexico. The yucca pod is where the seeds for the plant are located, so depictions of the pod might represent the life-giving and sustaining significance of the yucca plant to the native people. There are also just a lot of petroglyphs that are interesting and have unique designs but are abstract and their meaning is unclear to us now. This isn't a petroglyph, but it's common to see a lot of these light gray worn areas on the rocks. The ancestral Pueblo often used grinding stones, also called metates, as well as manos, which is a Spanish word for hand, to grind their corn and other goods. They also used many of the boulders in the monument as grinding stones. We call them grinding slicks. Grinding slicks are bowl-shaped depressions on the basalt boulders that expose smooth, light gray stone that has been worn away over time, in some cases over generations. Like many national park sites, Petroglyph National Monument depends on the help of volunteers in running the park and assisting with education and outreach. Here, a park volunteer demonstrates standing over a grinding slick and holding a mano. These grinding areas may have been used to sharpen tools, grind corn or seed for food, make pigments, or grind native plants into mush or powder to prepare medicines used during healing ceremonies. Often the ancestral Pueblo were choosing boulders that had a natural dish-like depression for their grinding slicks. Note the petroglyphs on this one. The ancestral Pueblo were an agricultural society that lived along the Rio Grande and planted what is called the Three Sisters: corn, beans, and squash. They also constructed agricultural terraces along parts of the escarpment to build up soil and slow storm runoff. These agricultural terraces were successful in producing small farming areas where crops could be grown without the use of irrigation, referred to as dry land farming. These images might be depictions of corn stalks. Corn was vital to the ancestral Pueblo, and we would imagine they would pay tribute to the crop through the creation of corn petroglyphs.
We have been talking about the ancestral Pueblo, who left the majority of our petroglyphs. However, starting a little before 1700, a new group arrived, the Spanish.
The Spanish also left petroglyphs to record and mark their place on what we call the cultural landscape. The Spanish were mostly sheep herders and brought their religion, Christianity, so they left a lot of petroglyphs of Latin-style crosses representing their religion. The Spanish almost certainly would have known that a lot of the ancestral Pueblo petroglyphs were spiritual or religious in nature. Therefore, it makes a lot of sense that the Spanish would leave many petroglyphs that represent their religion, the new religion of the day, Christianity. The Spanish, who were mostly sheep herders, also left petroglyphs of sheep. It is hard to date petroglyphs. There isn't a carbon dating type method for dating petroglyphs. One technique that archaeologists and researchers use to date petroglyphs is to identify something in the petroglyph that you can date. So these are sheep. You can see by their horns. In 1540, the Coronado expedition came from Mexico and were the first whites to enter what is now Arizona and New Mexico. The Spanish would eventually bring horses and sheep to the southwest. So if a horse or a sheep is depicted in a petroglyph, you know it would have to be after 1540.
The National Park Service was created by the Organic Act of 1916. The agency's mission, as managers of national parks and monuments, is clearly stated.
To conserve the scenery and the natural and historic objects and the wildlife therein, and to provide for the enjoyment of the same in such manner and by such means as will leave them unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. The mission of the National Park Service. We are charged with protecting the scenery and natural history of the park, as well as the human history that took place in the park. So at Petroglyph National Monument, that means not only protecting individual petroglyphs, but the environment that the ancestral Pueblo in Spanish would have known, including protecting the plants and animals that call the park home. Everything in the monument, including small rocks, are considered protected and are part of our story. So we want to not harm anything in the park and leave everything in its place, where it is now. This visitor center was a house once and is eligible for historic designation. The former owner, Sophie Abele, was a well-known writer, researcher, and advocate for Native American rights. The National Park Service works to maintain and preserve her house and tell her story. These are pieces of Pueblo pottery that may have been part of a bowl used for cooking or for preparing food. It is called a pottery shard, which can provide important archaeological information. It's old, and it's an artifact that is part of the story of the park, and as such, we don't want it to be lost or taken, and it's best for it to remain where it is found, because that provides important information and clues for archaeologists. Once an artifact or object is removed from its location, the amount of information researchers can learn from that item drops to almost zero. This is another example of an artifact. This is an old corral left by the Spanish. There are lots of these rock walls around the monument. They would put their sheep in a corral at night to protect them from coyotes and to keep them from wandering off. It is just lava rocks stacked in a circle. But again, it is part of our story. It is evidence of the Spanish sheep herders, and we want to protect that evidence. So back to the mission of the National Park Service. The mission is to preserve and protect the natural and geologic area of a park, including the plants and animals and any historic features like historic buildings or archaeological sites. However, we are also charged with promoting the park, encouraging people to visit, to experience, and come to appreciate the park. More people entering the park brings more potential for vandalism, or people leaving trash, taking souvenirs like pieces of pottery or other artifacts, or hiking off trail in sensitive areas such as the escarpment, which can result in erosion problems. Fulfilling the mission can be challenging. We are constantly working to find the balance of both encouraging people to come to enjoy and experience the monument, but at the same time preserving and protecting the monument for future generations. Unfortunately, the monument has seen a lot of abuse over the years. This beautiful hand petroglyph is covered with bullet holes. The chip marks are a lighter gray color than the hand petroglyphs because they are more recent. The area which is now the monument was used as a trash dump site and firing range for many years before the park was created. In many cases, people were using the petroglyphs themselves as targets. Once petroglyphs are damaged or destroyed, they cannot be brought back. This was done a few years ago in a very high-use area where lots of people visit. It was probably done very quickly with just a house key, and now it's a permanent eyesore, something that is very ugly that many people see every day. It also might unfortunately inspire others to leave their marks on the rocks.
We call this site Boca Negra, which is Spanish for black.
As park rangers for the National Park Service, we are honored to preserve and protect these significant places within our national park system, and to educate and inspire the public to assist us in carrying out our important mission. This is a unique park located within the city limits of Albuquerque, New Mexico. We encourage you to explore and learn more about the park, but also to do your part to ensure others after you can also enjoy and experience what you experienced.